Bakirova presents a series of discussions about the place of Kazakh culture in the global world. Meetings with prominent public figures, candid conversations, collisions of opinions, and discussions about the most important things.
Hello, dear viewers. Our guest today is Oleg Boretsky. Oleg Boretsky is an example of a person who is true to his mission. For many decades, he had the power over the minds of our compatriots as he has been conducting huge educational work in the field of cinema. His professional and philosophical view of the world and a lively sense of beauty allows his knowledge to be in great demand. Oleg is well versed in all kinds of cultural phenomena. Hello, Oleg.
Hello, Joly.
You've no idea how long I've dreamed of meeting with you and talking to you. I know that you're a philosopher and a film critic. You run a cinema club. I attended your screenings several times, and naturally, I have a lot of questions. Even though I usually focus on cultural issues, I would like to start with something else. You are a philosopher, and in one way or another, philosophy is a science that we all absolutely need, as it unites everything in this world. Please tell us a little more about this part of your life.
Well, this is a big question.
Yes.
Because firstly, philosophy is not a science. Philosophy is very personal, and I believe that it is a reflection of many things, of some ultimate meanings, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, as the respected and beloved founder of the theater of the absurd, Eugene Ionesco, said, philosophy is useless. It is not something pragmatic that can bring you money, but it is necessary as well as
Art?
As music, arts and theater. They are useless but necessary.
Are they useless in the sense that we don't produce material values? That we're not changing the world?
Yes, they are useless in the sense that they do not carry any material value. There is no practical value in things like fame, money, and everything else, but nevertheless a person feels the need for it.
Sometime in my youth, when I, among other things, was planning to be involved in science, I heard that there was such a thing as Kazakh philosophy, and I always thought that it was established as a result of the nomadic lifestyle of the Kazakh people. Nomads moved around the planet across different territories. They didn't own any burdensome objects of material culture, which they held on to. They were very easygoing. From this, I believe, the tradition of perceiving the world philosophically came from...
This is some kind of a Kantian discourse.
Is it? I'm not an expert.
Although, you know, my teacher, Agin Kasimjanov, once said the following about the peculiarities of the Kazakh people. We have had so many conferences on identity in 30 years, and we are all trying to understand who we are. He said that the nomads, and we are the nomadic culture, that only nomads have this intrinsic something that will never arise in local cultures, the contemplation of infinity. You see, it sounds so beautiful.
Very beautiful indeed.
These are the roots of what you were talking about. And of course, the Kazakh philosophy school is a school of dialectics. We can say that the Soviet teaching was of great weight and of great importance, but now everything has changed. Now there is a different philosophy in the world.
I'd be very interested to know what was the topic of your thesis and when did you write your PhD thesis? Can you tell us a little about this?
From the point of view of the discipline, the thesis was entitled The Finitude of Human Existence as a Problem of Worldview.
How old were you when you were thinking about topics like this?
I was 27 to 28.
And you're still thinking about it?
Yes. Since then, I have been thinking about the problem of human finiteness, I mean death. Fact is that when I was just starting to study at the Faculty of Philosophy, this idea of Nikolai Berdayev sank deep into my soul. The idea that, in fact, there are only two truly philosophical themes, love and death. It was interesting to me, and for the first time in Kazakhstan, I wrote a dissertation on the topic of death. And on the basis of this dissertation, a few years later, when I had a little teaching experience, I made a course in thanatology, a philosophy of life and death, the philosophy of the meaning of life. Ask any person what philosophy is. They will answer that this is about the meaning of life, an internal topic to which there is no answer.
No answer.
Although there is answer to that in philosophy.
Is there an answer? You're renowned among the Kazakh cultural and educated public due to the fact that you're a film critic, you're an expert in this field, and because you run Oleg Boretsky's cinema club. I visited it several times and it's amazing. I will never forget the screening of the film Shine. Rachmaninoff's third concert. When you asked me to tell the public something about it, how did you turn down this path?
You know, everything just happened simply and naturally because doing philosophy, having achieved certain success, having written dissertations in philosophy and so on, at some point, it was after 30, I suddenly discovered that there is philosophy outside the philosophical form, so to speak. And it began in the 20th century when philosophy moved into the form of fiction. And then there were paintings of the 20th century. Well, we all agree that Salvador Dali is philosophy in its purest form. And then there's music, there's theater, and of course cinema. And in fact, when in the early 90s I discovered and watched all Tarkovsky, Bergman, and Antonioni, and by the way, my favorite director is not Fellini, but because he was all about the philosophy of loneliness, non-communicability, and in general it was a reflection of time. And I discovered that he was right. Those things did not exist in the text. They exist in the form of images on the screen, and this is how this interest in philosophy gradually expanded.
Interest in philosophy or cinema?
I mean, I found philosophy in cinema, and at the same time cinema added something to my knowledge of philosophy.
You know, I can relate, as this is exactly what I think about the piano repertoire. It seems to me that it's philosophical, and it's definitely not entertaining. Well, perhaps in some rare exceptions, but it's precisely educational. I often watch the audience when I watch the recordings of concerts, and they are always so immersed. They think about something of their own. It's understandable because the second parts of the works of Brahms, Beethoven, Mozart, Rachmaninoff, and Tchaikovsky, all of this is a philosophy of the highest level, and it's a living philosophy, as you would put it. Philosophy that turned into music, yes? How interesting.
The way you talk about music, it is so charming. Unfortunately, we do not have an opportunity to attend a live concert or a screening in a cinema these days. Many people are glued to their cell phones, and that's all.
They believe this is enough.
But in this case, art ceases to exist. A film on a tablet, on an iPhone, or an iPad is no longer art, because the magic of the big screen disappears. The impression disappears.
Live sound, breathing,
and dimension.
And space.
Yes, and this is especially true of musical concerts. When I listen to an organ concert or a piano concert, an inner liberation occurs. And this is so important these days.
You host the Kino Blues program on Radio Classics, which means that you still focus your attention on movie soundtracks?
I don't like the word soundtrack.
What word do you like then?
Film music.
Why don't you like the word soundtrack? Too mundane?
Yes, you're right. If you look at the film music masterpieces, they can also be considered classics. In fact, John Williams, Hans Zimmer, James Horner.
Great music.
This is classic. Why I don't like the word soundtrack? Just listen to 3 or 4 minutes of the composition of James Horner's Kaleidoscope of Mathematics from A Beautiful Mind film about the mathematical genius John Nash. And you know, when you listen to it in the context of a film, naturally this is one impression, but only when playing it separately, when you know what kind of musical work it is, you suddenly realize that this is a musical answer to your question about what is creativity, what happens in the soul and in the head of a genius. And the same can be said about the stunning composition For the Love of a Princess by Horner in the film Braveheart, or Hans Zimmer.
He's just amazing. You know, I'm sure that in addition to being a great specialist in film music, you're well versed in other kinds of music too. For example, the classics. What are your preferences?
But here again, I focus on cinema. Because one thing is music that just sounded abstractly in my life. Beethoven, for example, and I know that he has the Moonlight Sonata and various beautiful symphonies. And it's a completely different matter when I suddenly start watching the movie Immortal Beloved with my favorite Gary Oldman, who stars there. And I watch this drama and the tragedy of his life. This is a biopic speaking in cinema language.
I haven't watched this film.
I rediscover Beethoven, same as I do when I watch Forman's Amadei. And of course, there are other incarnations of Mozart and so on. But Miloš Forman's film is different, as it is a picture of freedom. Freedom is the main character.
This is awesome.
This is Schubert, for example, yes, in the French film starring Depardieu called Too Beautiful for You.
Well, again, I look at you and I think, you're of Slavic nationality. I'm Asian. Here we are in our country, in Kazakhstan, talking about global world processes. Does our large territory allow us to raise such topics? Our ambitions of a large country inherited from the great Soviet Union. We seem to perceive small questions not that seriously. We want to think big, globally. Do you think our ability to look at the world on a large scale depends on the fact that we live in this large area, despite the fact that we are city dwellers?
I think so. This is the contemplation of infinity, which we mentioned before. It allows us to talk about some kind of world processes and critically look at what is happening now in the world, what is happening with art, what is happening with culture. This is unconditional. Because for me as a philosopher, if you look globally, and this is typical for us, since we are included in this world process, we are in a trend.
We're engaged.
Yes, we are. And for me, this is a very sad fact that can be stated. We now have a state of civilization without culture. All material goods, gadgets, technology, standard of living, quality of life, everything overshadows the spiritual. These days, a person can do without culture. That's the point. And here I immediately remember Carl Gustav Jung, a follower of Freud, who said, "You know, there are 5 factors of happiness, and it is clear that they include normal, physical, mental health, job satisfaction, friends, and the environment that brings you satisfaction in life. Because happiness is contentment with life. That is what philosophers say." But he also mentioned the 3rd factor, the ability to perceive beauty in nature and art. So it turns out that if a person is deprived of this ability, if he was not taught, if music for him is an empty phrase, if he sees a picture as some color spots, then this person cannot be genuinely happy. You see?
But is it important to recommend watching films, and will people listen at all? Who are these people who listen when it is believed that you cannot teach, but you can only learn?
Научить нельзя, научиться только можно.
Если говорить о кино, конечно, научить...
If we talk about cinema, then of course it is difficult to teach, sometimes even impossible, same as with music and rhetoric. But you can set the direction, you can tell, you can explain what the nature of cinema is. Because Andrei Arsenovich Tarkovsky said very well about this. He said that cinema is time captured. And when in 2 hours we montage the life of a protagonist in Once Upon a Time in America, we take different intervals, edit them, and here is the dichronomy, things that happened at different times, so we combine them into one whole piece, and catharsis occur, and we cry. So catharsis is the goal of any art or piece of music of which you are well aware.
These are my thoughts, precisely. A 2-hour concert. This is a performance. This is a unit of time. This is life. Sometimes there's a whole life in a 3-minute piece.
Of course. And you live this life with a protagonist, with a composer, because this is how Oldman once said, playing Beethoven, it is impossible to explain the hypnosis. And here the same thing happens. Yes, you can certainly advise something and tell people, guys, movies are about this and that. There are films, there are non-films, and this applies to the script, to the acting, to the director's intention, the art of camera, and so on. As you know, the wonderful philosopher Merab Mamardashvili once said in Soviet times.
And this is another name.
We can't proceed without it. He was a very complex thinker, of course, but his lectures were always fascinating.
Have you attended his lectures?
Yes, I was lucky to attend, and of course, I read a book that was published later, after his death, after 1990. He said that culture is what allows you to practice complexity.
Wow.
On the other hand, he said a completely simple thing, again in relation to culture and art. Culture is what remains when you have forgotten everything.
This.
It cannot be explained by erudition or your memory. It is about how well read you are, because nowadays there are a lot of bloggers and so-called critics who write,
Who know everything.
yes, and they think that it's all about how many things you have watched. So I have watched many things. So what? What is the level of your understanding of cinema? How much can you comprehend in what you have watched? That's what's important.
Знаете, думаю, что очень сильно в начале
You know, at the beginning of the program, I was very intrigued by your phrase about the meaning.
смысл-то
Of life.
So, the meaning of life.
Philosophy has an answer to the question about the meaning of life.
Please.
Let's start with the fact that there is a purpose in life and there is a meaning in life. What is the purpose? It is when reaching something this must stop, we have achieved this. Now, if you don't set a small goal in life, let's say,
A purpose of life.
the goal can be to get married, to reach a certain level, to decide something else. These are all personal goals. And speaking globally, the goal of life itself, as a phenomenon, is death, reaching the point when one's life stops. But then the question is, if the goal of life is death, what prevents us from ending it faster?
Aspirations.
It is the meaning of life that stops us. And here the answer is very simple. The meaning of life is a struggle with death. The struggle not with its inevitability, no one will escape from this, but a struggle with its absoluteness. Remember in the movie, We'll Live Until Monday, when the students say to the teacher, whom Tikhonov played wonderfully, they say, there are only 15 lines about Lieutenant Schmidt. He says, yes, 15 lines, and some people leave a dash between dates. This is absolute death, you understand. And then the question arises, the struggle with the absoluteness of death, in what way is it expressed? Yes, you will not be, but what did you leave behind? You live in the works of your creativity, you live in your children. You are what you leave behind. This wisdom was discovered thousands of years ago, you see, and there is an answer to the question about love. Remember, we agreed that there are two philosophical themes, love and death. The Apostle Paul said about it in his epistle to the Corinthians. When he was asked what love is, he replied that love is something that does not pass. Falling in love passes, but love is something that does not cease to be. And you know, no one has put it better in thousands of years.
This was such a great conversation, Oleg. Thank you so much. I will see you soon.
Thank you.